Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends, and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers, to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 5 of the most disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. Lubbock is one of those places where the land stretches so far and flat, it feels like God forgot to put an edge on it. A place where wind carries secrets, and old cotton fields remember everything. Benny Calder was 10 the first time he heard the whisper. It was a cloudless October night, the kind where the moon looked like a peeled eye in the sky, huge and too bright. His family's old farmhouse sat just past FM 1585, surrounded by rusting barbed wire fences and the dying remnants of a cotton field that hadn't been worked properly since his granddad passed. Benny had trouble sleeping ever since his dog, Rufus, went missing 2 weeks earlier. That night he was staring out the bedroom window, wide awake, when he saw it. A shape. Big. Unnaturally big. It moved like it was gliding, smooth and silent. But its form was janky, like a broken man walking, on stilts made of bone. It had no hair, no face that Benny could make out. Just long limbs and pale, rubbery skin that shined under the moonlight like something wet. And it walked the fence. Slowly. Deliberately. Every time it reached a fence post, it would stop. Tilt. Its head. And whisper. It sounded like dead leaves scratching glass. Benny couldn't make out the words at first until the 5th post, when the whisper floated up clearer than it should have through a closed window. It said, "Rufus." Benny's chest locked up. He didn't scream, didn't move. He just stared as the thing kept walking the fence, whispering names he didn't recognize. By the time it reached the tree line and vanished, Benny had wet himself and didn't even notice. The next day, Benny told his grandfather, who was 84 and halfway to senile, but sharp when it mattered. Old Walter Calder was the kind of man who remembered things other folks worked hard to forget. He sat in his recliner, listening, nodding slowly. "You saw it too, didn't you?" Benny asked, voice shaking. Walter didn't answer right away. He just lit a lucky strike and said, "That ain't a thing, boy, that's a warning." "A warning of what?" Walter leaned in close. His breath smelled like old tobacco and mothballs. "When I was 12, my daddy caught it out there whispering. He said it only comes when the land's owed blood. Said it walks the fence to count souls. And if it says your name out loud, you don't wake up the next morning." Benny didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. 3 days later, his classmate, Cassidy Milburn, didn't show up at school. Her parents said she'd gone missing during the night, no forced entry, no sign of struggle. Just her bed, perfectly made, and her nightgown folded on the windowsill. Benny's blood turned to ice. He remembered the name. Cassidy. The second one the thing had whispered. 2 nights after that, a teenage boy named Jonah Reese went missing too. Gone. Without a trace. That name had come third. Benny started keeping a notebook. Every full moon, he sat by his window and waited. And every time, the thing came walking the fence, pale, long, silent, whispering one new name each time. A week later, his best friend Kyle heard what he was doing and stayed the night. They watched together. Benny told him not to look too close. Kyle laughed. "What's it gonna do, whisper me to death?" That night, the thing whispered Kyle. By morning, he was gone. By the time Benny turned 16, he'd documented 18 names, 17 had gone missing. The last name was one he hadn't expected, Walter Calder. Benny tried to wake his grandpa, but it was too late. Walter had died in his sleep, mouth open like he'd been screaming, but no sound came out. After that, the thing stopped whispering for almost a year. Benny thought maybe it was over. He was wrong. It came back one April night when the moon was so bright it made shadows blue. Benny now lived alone. His parents had moved to Houston after Walter's death, but Benny refused. He said the land had stories it wanted to finish. The thing walked again, slower this time, more confident. And when it reached the center post, it did something new. It turned its head toward Benny's window. Its mouth opened wide, and the whisper came through the glass like steam from a kettle. Benny. He didn't run, didn't scream. Instead, he walked outside barefoot in the dirt, moonlight glowing on his skin. He met the thing at the fence. "Why me?" Benny asked. The thing tilted its head. "You listen. You see. You remember. That's all I ever need." And then, like a mist in reverse, it vanished. Benny was found dead 2 days later. No wounds, no signs of trauma, just lying by the barbed wire fence with a notebook on his chest. Inside the notebook were names, dozens of them. Some crossed out, some circled. At the very end, one last line was written in red ink, though no pen was found nearby. It said, "The fence keeps the line. The names pay the price. You'll hear yours soon." Today, the Calder property is empty, fenced off with signs that say, "Keep out and no trespassing." But if you stand near the barbed wire on a full moon night, if the wind is right, you might hear something. A long, dry whisper, and maybe, just maybe, it says your name. Montel, Texas is the kind of place you only end up in by accident or bad luck. One gas pump, one church, and a stretch of farm road 334 that runs through it like a dry vein. There's a bend in the road just past the church graveyard, a place the locals call Dead Man's Mile. You won't find that name on a map. Truckers say it's cursed. Old folks say it's haunted. Teenagers dare each other to drive through it after midnight. Some make it, some don't. But everyone in Montel knows. One thing, don't pick up the pale woman. Marty Hayes was driving home late from Uvalde, half drunk and barely awake. His wife had thrown him out again. Something about his temper and the way he looked at their daughter like he didn't recognize her anymore. He didn't remember the fight. He just remembered the silence afterward. It was past 1 a.m. when he turned onto 334. The moon was out, fat and bruised looking. A thick mist curled over the road like breath on cold glass. That's when he saw her, a woman standing just off the shoulder in a white dress soaked to her ankles in something dark. Her skin was pale, paler than chalk, almost glowing. Her long hair hung limp and her face was downturned. Marty slowed without meaning to. She looked up. Her eyes were black. Not the kind of black that's just really dark brown. These were holes, empty, weeping blood. Not crying, weeping. Thick, red tears, rolling down her cheeks, staining her neck. She raised a trembling hand and said, "Please, I need to see my boy." Marty should have kept driving, but he didn't. She got in without opening the door. 1 second she was outside, the next she was in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap like she was headed to Sunday service. The air turned cold, so cold that Marty's windshield frosted up from the inside. He couldn't speak, couldn't even swallow. "My son," she said again, her voice like water over gravel. "He died here, 30 years ago. Burned to death in a car like this." Marty tried to look at her but couldn't. His hands were trembling on the wheel. "I told him not to go out that night. I told him to stay home." The road stretched ahead forever, looping like a snake in the dark. "I begged him." Marty looked in the rearview mirror. For a moment, just a flicker, he saw the back seat in flames. The woman started humming. It was a lullaby, soft, old, the kind his grandmother used to sing when the storms came. Marty's eyes began to blur, his grip loosening. The road twisted sharply ahead, but he couldn't focus. Suddenly she screamed. Not words, not sound. Pain. The car jerked sideways. He slammed the brakes. Gravel spat from the tires. The truck skidded off the shoulder and stopped just inches from the embankment. The passenger seat was empty, but the blood was still there, pooled, soaking into the fabric. And in the mist outside, he saw a boy, maybe 15, his face blistered and raw. His eyes locked onto Marty's. The boy raised his hand. Marty blinked. The boy was gone. Back in town, Marty asked around, quietly. He didn't tell them what he saw. Just asked if anyone remembered a boy who died in a car fire on 3 and 34. Old Man Duffy was the only one who answered. Saw her, didn't you? He said, not looking up from his newspaper. Who? The black-eyed mother. Marty froze. Her boy died in 92. Drunk driver hit him on that bend, car caught fire. He screamed for her, they say. Burned alive before help came. She died a year later. Suicide. Drove into a tree trying to follow his voice. Duffy leaned in close, and for the first time Marty saw real fear in the old man's eyes. She ain't asking for a ride, son. She's asking for revenge. 2 months later, Marty drove that road again. He hadn't meant to. He was coming back from a job in San Angelo trying to outrun another fight, another mistake, another bottle. The moon was full. The mist curled, thick and slow. He didn't see her this time. He heard her. From the back seat. I never got to say goodbye. Marty looked in the mirror. She was there, pale and bleeding, her black eyes shining in the dark. He screamed. The truck veered. They found the wreckage the next morning. His body was burned beyond recognition. There was no sign of anyone else in the cab, just one handprint on the inside of the windshield. A woman's. Long fingers. Blood red. They still see her on Dead Man's Mile. Pale. Silent. Eyes like holes. In the world. Some say she's still looking for her son. Others say she's looking for someone to take his place. Whatever you believe, if you drive down Farm Road 334 on a misty night and see a woman in white on the shoulder, don't stop. Don't. Look, and whatever you do, don't let her in. The bell hadn't tolled in over a century. Not since the last priest was found dead with his tongue torn out and crucifix nails in his palms. Way back in 1912. In a town too dry and forgotten for God to remember. They say it was 3:07 a.m. when the sound first returned. A single, low ring, hollow as a cave and twice as deep, rumbled from the old mission tower above Presidio, Texas. The kind of sound you feel in your teeth before your ears catch up. Nobody should have heard it. Nobody should have been awake. But across the town, people sat bolt upright in their beds, sweating and shaking. And the next morning, nearly 24 residents reported the same dream. They were inside a coffin, screaming. James Halpern wasn't from Texas. He was a historian, a burned-out academic with a drinking problem and a failed marriage that still ached like a pulled tooth. When he came to Presidio in the spring of 2021, he wasn't looking for ghosts. He was looking for silence. And in Presidio, he found it. A blistering silence. The kind that sticks to your bones and makes you second-guess your heartbeat. One gas station. No bars. An old post office with no stamps. Just heat, dust, and time thick as molasses. The town had one claim to fame. La Misión Santa Cruz del Cielo Perdido. The mission of the lost sky. Built in 1799 by Spanish missionaries, abandoned by 1850, and left to rot at the far edge of town, like an infected tooth in the mouth of the desert. It was beautiful in a way that made you uncomfortable. Crumbling stone walls, vines like veins crawling up its flanks, and the bell, black, silent, massive, hung in its tower like a dead heart. James loved it immediately. The first night he visited the bell tower, James brought his notebook and a small bottle of scotch. He sat beneath the dead bronze husk and, Sketched it by moonlight, making notes about erosion patterns and colonial symbols no one remembered how to translate. He didn't leave until well after midnight. He was in bed by 2. At exactly 3:07 a.m., he woke up screaming. In the dream, he was on his back. The world was pitch black and his arms were pinned at his sides. Dirt pressed against his lips. Something soft wriggled across his cheek. A worm? A root? He tried to scream, but his mouth was full of earth. When he jolted awake, he spat grit onto the floor, and beneath the haze of fear and confusion, he heard something far in the distance, a sound that shouldn't have been there. A bell. James wasn't the only one who heard it. Lucinda Torres, age 71, had lived in Presidio her whole life. She walked to the market the next morning and told everyone who'd listened that the bell has started again. Most ignored her, not Deputy Harold Clay. He'd had the dream too. Only in his, the coffin wasn't quiet. There was scratching, not from the outside trying to get in, but from the inside trying to get out. His own fingers, raw and bleeding, clawing the wood until his nails peeled away like wet paper. He tried to laugh it off, but he didn't sleep the next night, or the night after. By the end of the week, his eyes were red as rust, and he'd stopped. Speaking altogether, James visited him. "What did you dream?" he asked. Harold just stared at the wall and whispered, "She's still down there." James dug into the church records. Most had been destroyed in a fire in 1933, but one handwritten copy of a missionary's journal survived in a private collection in El Paso. He paid $600 for a scanned copy and nearly passed out reading it. It mentioned the bell and something far worse. October 31st, 1810. Sister Maria has been locked in the crypt. She speaks in tongues and claws at the walls. She says the devil rides the bell and that it rings only for the living. She won't stop screaming. She says she can still hear it, even underground. May 4th, 3:07 a.m. The bell rang again, but this time it rang 3 times. James watched from a mile away. He had set up a tripod and infrared camera near the edge of the brush. The bell moved. Not a breeze, not an animal. It swayed like a pendulum, and the sound that came out wasn't a clean chime, it was a moan. The next morning, 2 people were dead. Lucinda Torres had clawed her own face off in her sleep. Her fingers were torn to the bone and her mattress soaked in blood. The medical examiner ruled it severe psychosis with parasomnia. And Harold Clay? He disappeared. All they found were his boots, outside the mission crypt. James lost control. He stopped writing, stopped calling his editor, he stopped eating. Every night he heard it, and every night the dream grew longer, darker. He didn't just wake up in a coffin anymore. He woke up under the bell, buried beneath the foundation of the mission. The stone above him so close he could smell the rot in the bricks. Something dripped down, warm, wet, metallic. He followed the drip in the dark, dragging his fingers through the cracks. They found him days later, half mad, wandering barefoot through the desert, his fingernails packed with stone dust and old mortar. He kept whispering, "It's not a bell, it's a mouth." The town doesn't talk about it now. The mission is fenced off, the bell tower sealed in concrete. But those who were there, the ones who heard it, they don't sleep much anymore. Not without pills, not without dreams of tight spaces and voices from under the floor. And every so often, when the wind is right, you can still hear it. One ring, deep and hollow. And if you do, if you hear it at 3:07 a.m., you better pray you wake up before you feel the dirt falling on your chest. It's just a house. That's what people say when they drive past it. Just a sweet little sky blue house on the corner of Blanco Street and Ellesmere Avenue in San Antonio. A bright white porch swing, shutters the color of faded forget-me-nots. Fresh white paint that never peels, a yard that never overgrows. Always spotless, always waiting, and always for sale. But no one ever sees a "for sale" sign go up. It just happens, like magic. One day it's empty, and the next, there's a U-Haul in the driveway, a young couple, a small family, a single woman trying to start over, smiling, unpacking, dreaming. And then, nothing. They vanish. The lights stay on, the grass stays green, the mail stops, but you never see the people again. They don't move out. They never do. The Pearsons moved in on a Wednesday. Rebecca Pearson was 34, a first-grade teacher, quiet, kind, and trying her best after a nasty divorce. Her son, Leo, was 6, small for his age, bright as hell, and obsessed with maps. Their sewing furniture was modest. Their life was small, but Rebecca swore this house would be a new start. Blanco Street felt safe. The neighbors waved. The yard was big, and the price was too good to be true. Why so cheap? Rebecca had asked the realtor. Old listing. He shrugged. Not quite, meeting her eyes. Estate stuff. Nobody's lived here long. She signed the papers anyway. She shouldn't have. The blue house was beautiful inside. Pristine wallpaper, retro fixtures. Even the oven was a baby blue General Electric model from the 1950s. Still working, no rust, no smells, not even a speck of dust in the attic. It was like stepping into a time capsule someone had lovingly maintained for 70 years. Only one thing was off. The hallway closet at the end of the second floor. It wouldn't open. Rebecca tried every key, even had a locksmith come. He shrugged, told her it must be nailed shut, and left after 10 minutes. It's just storage, she told herself. She'd been telling herself that for weeks when she heard the knock. It happened at 11:43 p.m. on a Friday. Leo was asleep. Rebecca was watching a rerun of MASH when the screen flickered. Just for a moment, just a blink, and instead of actors on a battlefield, the screen showed her own living room. But the camera was high, like it was watching from the ceiling. She blinked again and the scene shifted. Now it was the hallway, the second floor, and the closet. The doorknob was turning. The sound that followed wasn't static. It was breathing. Then, as if someone had sliced the cable feed in half, the screen bled black liquid from its corners, thick and slow as molasses, pooling across the wood floor. Rebecca screamed, and the screen returned to normal. She went to City Records the next morning. No one had ever officially owned the Blue House before 1972, and even then the paperwork was thin. Mismatched signatures, gaps in dates. In the margins of one dusty file, someone had scribbled in red ink, "Do not transfer." "Occupied," Rebecca asked the clerk what it meant. The woman didn't look up from her sandwich. "You got the house on Blanco?" "I'd move." "Why?" "They all try to leave," she said. "But the house don't let them." Leo started drawing strange things. Crayon sketches of pale people in blue pajamas standing in his room at night. A woman with no mouth who kept opening the fridge. A little boy with empty eyes who walked backward up the stairs. "They live in the walls," he told his mother. She didn't believe him until the night she heard the footsteps in the attic. Not rats, not raccoons. Footsteps, slow, heavy, someone walking circles. She called the police. They searched every inch of the house, even the crawl space. Found nothing, but when they left, one officer pulled her aside. "You can't sell it," he said. "You're in the book now." "What book?" He didn't answer. It opened on its own. 4 a.m. Rain hammering the windows like angry fingers. Rebecca woke to a soft creak from the hallway. She stepped into the corridor with a flashlight. The door, once sealed shut, was wide open. Inside was a staircase, old, spiral, leading down. There shouldn't have been a basement. Leo was behind her now, wide-eyed. "It's where they sleep," he whispered. She picked him up and slammed the door. But it didn't stay closed. That night, she dreamt of a dining room with too many chairs and no faces. Just the sound of chewing and wet lips mumbling her name. Rebecca's sister Kara hadn't heard from her in weeks. No calls, No text, just one postcard in the mail. It read, "The house is kind, the house is fair, the house keeps what it's given." That was 2 years ago. The blue house is still there, still perfect, still waiting. Another family just moved in last week. Young couple, new baby, fresh dreams. The neighbors waved. The grass was green, the shutters still that soft, cheerful blue. But nobody asked where the Pearsons went. They never do. The desert doesn't forget. You can bury things out there. Bones, sins, secrets. But the sand shifts, the wind screams, and the heat peels the skin off everything, eventually. Outside El Paso, there's a dead stretch of scrubland where nothing grows but broken mesquite trees and old rumors. That's where 12-year-old Eric Rivas found the jawbone, not a whole skull, just the bottom half. Sharp, yellowed teeth. Too many of them, more than any man should have. Eric wasn't supposed to be out that far. His abuela had warned him about the desert, about things that watch from under the mesquite, spirits that wear human skins, coyotes that laugh like drunk men. But Eric was 12, lonely, and brave in that kind of stupid way kids sometimes are when the world's been unfair too long. His dad had left last summer. His mom worked late. His older brother had vanished 2 years ago in the exact same desert. So Eric wandered. He kicked through the dry brush and old beer cans. That's when he saw it, nestled between two twisted mesquite roots like it had grown there. A jawbone. Thick. Human. But wrong. The teeth were too long. The curve too wide. It felt warm when he picked it up. That night, the whisper came. It didn't echo in the room. It echoed in his skull, like a voice pressed directly to the inside of his brain. "Feed me." Eric sat up, drenched in sweat. The jawbone was under his bed, wrapped in an old bandana. He'd brought it home like some weird treasure, planning to scare the neighborhood kids with it. But now the bone was humming, literally humming. "Hungry," the voice said. "Give me teeth." The first thing he fed it was a dead dog. Not one he killed, just a stray that had gotten hit by a truck down by the highway. Eric dragged it home in a black trash bag and buried it behind the shed. That night, the jawbone whispered again, closer. Eric didn't know what that meant, but when he checked the next morning, the bag was torn open. The dog's skull was gone. The jawbone under his bed looked different, bigger, like it had grown. And the teeth? Now there were even more. Leo was a neighborhood bully. He once lit Eric's science project on fire, stole his lunch 3 times in 1 week, called him names Eric's mom wouldn't even repeat. So when Leo's cat went missing, nobody suspected the quiet boy with the tired eyes and dirt under his nails. Eric hadn't wanted to do it, but the voice had gotten louder, more demanding. Teeth, blood, closer. The next morning, Eric found something new in the mirror. His gums were bleeding. His baby teeth were loose. His smile hurt. And under the bed, the jawbone had split into 2 pieces, like a broken mouth trying to open wider. It was late October when Eric started dreaming of his brother. Javi had been 16 when he disappeared. Left to hike into the desert after a fight with their father and never came back. Now in his dreams, Javi stood under a twisted mesquite tree with a coyote's grin and black eyes that dripped pitch. "You found it," Dream Javi whispered. "It's choosing you now. Choosing me for what?" To finish what I started, Eric woke up screaming. His gums were bleeding again, 2 more teeth gone. Under his pillow, instead of coins, were tiny pebbles and a smear of black sap. Eric dug where he found the jawbone. This time he went deeper, with a rusted shovel and bloodied hands. 3 feet down he found more bones. Not human, not animal. Something in between, a crooked spine like a snake, fingernails like obsidian blades, skulls, dozens of them, each with jaws missing. "It's not from here," came the whisper. Eric dropped the shovel. It came long before men, before names. It eats and becomes, you are the next. On the night of the blood moon, Eric disappeared. His mom filed a report. Flyers went up. Search parties combed the desert, no sign of him. But some nights, usually right before a storm, folks out by the mesquite groves say they hear something walking under the trees. Not quite a man. Not quite an animal. Something big. Something with a jaw too wide for its skull. A mouth that stretches sideways when it grins. And teeth. So many teeth. Sometimes it calls out names. The names of children. The names of brothers. The names of whoever's listening too closely. Last week, a boy named Mateo found a bone near that same grove. Small, white, shaped like a molar. He picked it up, tucked it in his pocket. That night, he heard a voice whisper in his ear as he slept, "Feed me." They say there's a stretch of FM 1709 in Keller where the night hangs heavier. Like the darkness, there hasn't quite made up its mind about staying. The road cuts clean through suburbia, but if you drive it late enough, past midnight with your windows down and the radio on, you'll feel it. The hum beneath the tires turns hollow like you're riding over a long, empty box. Something forgotten, something buried. That's where the tower is. No sign marks it. You just have to know. It's half sunken behind a scrubby patch of mesquite, trees that have been left to grow wild since the early 80s. The tower itself is rusted to hell, warped and leaning like it's trying to whisper something to the earth. It's not even connected to the grid anymore, not officially. The city had it decommissioned after a lightning strike, and electrical fire wiped out the old broadcast shed behind it. That was in 1983. Some say they heard screaming that night, not from people, but something low and massive, like a bull that had been skinned alive and dropped into boiling tar. The station, Keller 1709 AM, was wiped from the airwaves, at least during the day. But something came back. The first to hear it was a trucker named Billy Gant, summer of '96. He was driving back from Fort Worth around 2:45 a.m., high on caffeine and nicotine, trying to make it back to Roanoke before. He passed out at the wheel. Billy had the radio on low, tuned to an oldies station. That's when the static bled in, not a hiss, but a pulse, like something breathing in your ears. Then a voice calm and cold. "You're listening to KHEL 1709, all the way from the bottom." Billy laughed at first. Thought it was some sick joke. Maybe a pirate station screwing with the signal. But then the voice said his name. "Billy. Gant, we've been waiting." He swerved so hard he nearly clipped a stop sign. He said the voice had no human rhythm. It spoke like it remembered how to talk but had forgotten what it meant. Male and female at once. Too many mouths. Too many layers. There was a sound behind it like breathing but deeper. Like something massive just beneath the surface of the world, waiting to be let in. And the music. Oh God, the music. It wasn't music, not really. No instruments, no vocals, just sounds, a loop of whispering, moaning, a gasping breath that went on far too long. There were sobs in there. Wet, ugly sobs that sounded like they were coming from behind a door you'd never want to open. And then came the screaming. Not fast, not shrill. Slow, dragging, like someone being pulled apart an inch at a time while still trying to pray. Billy crashed into a ditch and shattered his left shoulder. He never drove that route again. Hell, he didn't even listen to the radio anymore. Went deaf by choice, blew out his eardrums with a pencil 5 months later. They found him in his trailer with the words, "Still playing," carved across the wall. After that, others started reporting strange broadcasts, always between 12:33 and 3 a.m., and always when driving within a few miles of the old tower. But here's the catch. The frequency didn't exist. FM 1709 was never active, never licensed, never assigned. The tower had been AM, and yet drivers swore they found the station while scanning FM channels. Some even caught pieces of it on their smartphones. But whenever they tried to record it, the files went blank. Or worse, played something entirely different when opened. like the one played by Carla Mayhew, a college student who was working on a podcast about urban legends in North Texas. She'd interviewed Billy Gant before he went full mute and decided to investigate the signal herself. She spent 6 nights parked off FM 1709 trying to catch the broadcast. On the 7th, she got it. She uploaded what she thought was a 6-minute segment of the show. What people heard instead was 13 seconds of silence, followed by the sound of dirt being shoveled, a muffled child's voice saying, "Stop. I'm not ready yet," and something slamming shut. After that, the audio corrupted. The file vanished from her laptop. Carla disappeared 2 days later. Her car was found still running near the base of the old tower, all the windows fogged from the inside. The tape recorder in the passenger seat had been melted, like it had caught fire without anything around it burning. Her phone was full of missed calls, all of them from numbers that didn't exist, all of them at exactly 3:07 a.m. The coroner ruled her missing, presumed dead, but some folks in Keller say they still see her sometimes, walking along FM 1709 in the dead of night, looking lost, or maybe waiting for a ride. And then there's the preacher. Reverend Ellis Wade heard about the radio station and declared it demonic, called it the devil's broadcast. He bought a $400 portable transmitter and went out there to shut it down with the word of God. That was a Sunday night in April 2011. They found him at 4:12 a.m., curled into a ball at the foot of the tower. His Bible had been ripped apart, pages stuffed into his mouth until he choked on them. The medical examiner said his ears were scorched from the inside. His wife said he'd left her a voicemail at 3:07 a.m. It was just 30 seconds of laughter, not his. Now listen closely, because here's where it gets bad. People still report catching the station, only now it doesn't seem random. The signal finds you. Some say it comes on when you're at your lowest, drunk, angry, suicidal, or even just hollow. When there's an empty space inside you big enough for something to crawl in, you'll be flipping stations, static, country, commercials. Then it'll click in. You're tuned to KHEL 1709, where every song is a confession. The voice will know your name, your regrets, the things you've buried, the things that want out. And if you keep listening, if you listen all the way to 3:07 a.m., you'll hear the final track. No one knows what it is because no one who's heard it has survived. Some say it's a recording of hell itself. Others say it's your own soul being dragged out through the speakers. But one thing is always true. You don't sleep after you hear it. You don't dream. You sink. They tried to tear the tower down in 2015. 4 construction workers quit mid-job. 2 of them suffered seizures on site. 1 walked off into the woods and was never found. The metal was too warped to cut. The ground underneath it too soft, like something was breathing down there, moving just out of sight. So they left it. Just like you should. If you're ever driving down FM 1709 late at night, and the static starts bleeding in, don't scan. Don't stop. Don't look at the tower no matter how much you feel it watching. And if you hear a voice say, "Welcome back," it's already too late. In Palo Pinto County, there's a patch of land so desolate and empty that even the cows know to avoid it. It's an old place, an ugly place, and the locals don't speak of it much, though they'll cross themselves when they pass by. They call it the old Grayson Farm, and it's been abandoned for nearly 60 years. Not even the wind feels right when it blows through that stretch of land. Something heavy and dark sits in the air like a stain you can't scrub out. It wasn't always that way. Back in 1965, there was a preacher by the name of Ezekiel Grayson. Zeke to those who knew him well enough to call him by name. He was the kind of man who made an impression, especially if you happened to catch his Sunday service. Zeke wasn't like the other preachers in the area. He didn't just deliver his sermons from the pulpit. He embodied them. Fire and brimstone, sure, but Zeke didn't just preach about the snakes in the Bible. He handled them, literally. There was something about his presence, his faith, and those snakes that drew people. In his congregation wasn't the usual kind. Zeke attracted the desperate, the broken, those who sought something beyond the ordinary, something raw. When Zeke held his service, the snakes came with him, rattlers and cottonmouths. black mambas and copperheads. He called them his brothers and sisters in Christ. Zeke would dance with the snakes, hold them in his hands like they were children, raise them up to the sky like a living offering. His hands, big and rough, weathered by the years, never flinched. Not once. He spoke in tongues, swaying back and forth, his long beard swishing in rhythm with the writhing reptiles. For hours they'd circle at his feet, and sometimes, if the spirit took him, he'd let them coil around his arms, across his shoulders, around his neck. But there was something dark about him, something that no one dared to speak aloud, something hungry. Some folks called it the devil's touch. They said Zeke had sold his soul to the snakes, that he had made a pact with something dark and ancient to wield the power of the reptiles. And that's when the bad things started happening. One hot night in July, Zeke went too far. He was out, at the edge of the Grayson farm near the old barn alone, holding a serpent in each hand as the congregation watched from the churchyard. His voice, wild and shaking, rose to a fever pitch as the snakes wound around his body. But then one of them, a huge timber rattler, struck. It happened so fast no one could stop it. Zeke let out a howl, a scream that was both human and something else entirely as the venom seeped into his veins. He stumbled, then fell to his knees, and in that instant the snakes scattered. The congregation rushed forward, but by the time they reached him, it was already too late. Zeke was gone. The preacher was dead. They buried him right there on the farm beside the barn, and life in Palo Pinto County moved on. But Zeke's legacy didn't die with him. It lingered, like an oil stain on the land, spreading in ways that no one understood. They say that from that moment on, something changed. His left hand, severed during the snake bite chopped off in the frenzy as people tried to save him, never stayed buried. It came back. No one knew how, but they'd hear stories from time to time, stories of people who'd been visited by it in their sleep. The preacher's left hand dark and twisted, reaching out in dreams before the death of the dreamer. And it wasn't just the ordinary folk it visited. It was the ones who had something to hide, the ones who'd made deals with the darkness, the ones who had their own sins they thought were buried deep enough. Zeke's left hand sought them out, always in the dead of night. It began with Russell Keene, a man who had lived through 2 wars and still couldn't escape the demons of his past. In the spring of 1971, Russell dreamt of Zeke's hand. It was crawling toward him on the floor of his cabin, its fingers twitching, reaching, seeking. The air in the room turned cold, colder than it had any right to be, and Russell could feel the weight of those eyes, Zeke's eyes, burning into him. Russell Keene, the voice whispered, though the lips never moved. You can't run from me. Russell woke up choking, sweat soaking his sheets, his heart slamming in his chest. He was still alive, but the dream haunted him, and the next morning, there was a bloody handprint on his front door. Russell died a week later of a heart attack, the doctors said, but the way he screamed as he passed, the way his eyes bulged, the way his hands grasped at his chest, they all knew it was something else, something worse. And that was only the beginning. The hand appeared again, a few years later, to Marcy Hollis. She was a school teacher, a good woman by most accounts, but she had secrets, and like most secrets, they were never as buried as people thought. Marcy dreamt of Zeke's hand late one night. It crawled across the floor of her bedroom, the nails clicking against the wood. It stretched out toward her, and when it touched her, the pain was unbearable. A sharp burning sensation shot up her arm as though the hand were pulling the life right out of her. The next morning, Marcy found the handprint on her bathroom mirror. She died within 3 days, an aneurysm, the doctor said. But once again, the scream that came with her death wasn't something the doctors could explain. The preacher's hand had returned, and it kept coming back. Over the years, the stories grew. The people who saw it in their sleep, the people who woke up covered, in cold sweat feeling something close, something reaching out for them, grew. The hand never chose the same people. It didn't matter how old or young you were, what your sins were, how good you thought you had been. Zeke's hand would find you. It didn't matter if you were just passing through. The moment you closed your eyes, it would come for you. In the spring of 1989, a sheriff named Paul Garrison, one of the few men brave enough to patrol Palo Pinto County at night, set out to track down the source of the strange deaths. The night before, he'd heard the rumors and seen the handprint himself. He drove out to the old Grayson farm, determined to stop whatever this curse was. But the land was quiet, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Paul entered the old barn, and as he stepped inside, his radio crackled to life. Static filled the air, and then faintly, like a whisper in the dark, he heard the words, "Come closer, Sheriff." He froze. And then from the darkness came the cold, twisted touch of Zeke's left hand. It reached out for him. The hand had never looked so real. Its fingers gripped his wrist, squeezing, and the pain shot up Paul's arm like fire. He screamed. The hand tightened, and the last thing he heard before everything went black was the preacher's voice, low and mocking. "You should have stayed away." They found Paul's body a week later, dumped in a field far from the farm. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. The sheriff's report didn't say much, only that Paul had died from an unknown cause. But the locals knew better. The preacher's left hand had claimed him too. Now they say it still walks the night, creeping into people's dreams when they're alone and their guard is down. It's been almost 60 years since Ezekiel Grayson disappeared, but that hand still haunts the darkness. Some say it's searching for something that was never buried properly. Others say it's still hungry, and when it finds you, there's no running. Devil's Sinkhole isn't a place you just pass by. You don't stroll up, casually snap a few pictures, and then head out. No, it isn't that kind of place. Not by a long shot. It sits deep in the heart of Texas, a black wound in the Earth's belly, a hole that looks like it could swallow up anything and anyone. No one knows how deep it goes, but the locals are sure of one thing. The wind that rises from the cavern has a voice, and it has a name. Your name. No one goes near the hole anymore, not unless they're looking for something they've already lost, something too terrible to leave behind. But the place didn't start off that way. It was once just a natural wonder, a hole in the earth, a tourist attraction where people would gather to marvel at the strange beauty of it. The wind that blew through the cavern, cool and constant, didn't seem so eerie back then. It was just nature, right? But the locals knew better. It started in the 1940s, when people began to notice something strange about the wind. It wasn't just the usual howl or whistle you'd expect from any cavern. No, this one was different. The breeze that rose from the depths of Devil's Sinkhole carried something more than air. It carried voices. Faint at first, whispers in the dark. But the more people came to see the hole, the louder the voices became. They began to shout, to scream, calling out in the dead of night. At first, people thought it was a trick of the wind, a natural phenomenon, like the eerie cries of an animal or the rustle of the trees. But the voices, those voices, never stopped. They came from the deep, from the very bowels of the earth, and they knew your name. They knew where you were from, what you were running from, what you feared. It wasn't long before the disappearances started. The first to go was a young man named Harold Jennings. He was a thrill seeker, just a boy really, with a love for the wild and a head full of reckless ambition. He had heard the stories, sure, but he didn't believe them. Not a bit. He figured it was all superstition, a bit of local color to make a boring town seem interesting. One summer evening, when the wind picked up a little earlier than usual, Harold decided to prove the old folks wrong. He'd hike out to the sinkhole, stand at the edge of the cavern, and see for himself what all the fuss was about. His buddies bet him he wouldn't do it. So he did. They watched from a distance, laughing as Harold stood at the rim of the hole, staring down into the inky darkness below. The wind picked up, and that's when they heard it. The first scream. It was soft at first, like someone was calling out in a dream. But it didn't take long for it to grow louder, sharper, as if the wind itself were growing desperate. Harold's expression shifted from cocky amusement to something more troubled. His lips pressed tight as the voices started calling him by name. Harold, It was a whisper at first, then it became a chant. He froze, his eyes widening as the wind seemed to press against his chest, pushing in on him, pushing him closer to the edge. "Harold, come closer." His friends called out to him, but it was no use. The wind, like a living thing, wrapped around his body, pulled him into the gaping mouth of the sinkhole. He tried to fight it, tried to step back, but his legs gave out, and, with a cry, he tumbled into the cavern. The others rushed to the edge, shouting for him, but there was no answer. No sound came back from below. The wind, instead of carrying his scream back up to them, swallowed it whole. They waited for hours, but Harold never came back. The sheriff said it was a freak accident. He chalked it up to Harold getting too close, to the edge and losing his balance, but the locals knew better, the ones who had lived here long enough to understand. The wind had called to him, and he had answered. And once you answer that call, you never come back. It wasn't just Harold, either. It started with the young and the foolish, but it didn't stop there. It spread like a sickness, taking anyone who dared approach the cave's edge at midnight. The wind would call their names, soft at first, then urgent, insistent, until they could no longer resist. And when they finally succumbed, their bodies were never found. The sinkhole took them, swallowed them whole, and the earth closed up behind them like they were never there. Some of the older folks tried to warn others, but they were too late. By the 1950s, the sinkhole had earned a reputation, and it wasn't the kind of place you wanted to visit anymore. The town around it grew quiet, the nights growing heavier with the weight of lost souls. Some folks moved away and others just stopped talking about it altogether. But the disappearances didn't stop. There were stories, always stories. People would say that they'd heard their name shouted from the cave, but when they went to check, there was no one there. But those who listened too long, those who didn't know better than to ignore the call, well, they weren't ever seen again. One such person was Elizabeth Crane, a school teacher who moved into the area in the late 1960s. She wasn't superstitious. She didn't believe in the local legends. She was too logical for that. But one night after a long day of teaching, she found herself restless, unable to sleep. Her mind wandered, and it wasn't long before she found herself walking the winding roads that led to the Devil's Sinkhole. The wind was just beginning to pick up as she arrived. It howled through the trees, a low, mournful sound. And then, as if from nowhere, she heard it. Elizabeth, her name. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. Her feet felt like they were nailed to the earth, but she couldn't help it. Her head whipped toward the edge of the cavern. She couldn't see anyone, but she heard it again, louder this time, more urgent. "Elizabeth, come closer." She felt a pull, a terrible tug in her chest, like the wind itself was calling her, wrapping around her, making it impossible to resist. Her body swayed, as if it had its own mind, as if it were moving, toward the edge all on its own. The wind screamed her name, louder than she could ever have imagined, and before she could stop herself, she was walking forward, step by step, closer and closer to the dark void. It was like stepping into a dream. No, more like stepping into a nightmare. Her feet dragged through the dirt, and the closer she got to the edge, the more the voices filled her mind. They were no longer whispers. Now they were shouts, calls, pleading for her to come. They called to her, not with words, but with something deeper, something primal. The wind gripped her tighter, faster. Her feet hit the edge, and then silence. The wind stopped. The voices ceased. Elizabeth Crane was never seen again. Some say she answered the call. Others say she was taken. But no one really knows what happens to those who fall into the sinkhole. No one has ever come back. Now when you stand on the road, leading to Devil's Sinkhole, you can hear it. The wind howls in your ears, carrying whispers from deep in the earth. It calls your name, and if you listen long enough, if you linger just a little too long, it will call to you in a way that's impossible to ignore. And if you answer, well, you'll be another name on the wind, and you won't come back. There's something wrong about Johnson's Feed and Grain, something that's been wrong for a long time. The store had closed its doors in 1985, a casualty of progress, left to rot on the outskirts of Waxahachie, Texas. But that's not the part that people whisper about. No, the part that gets them talking, the part that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, is what happens every year, when the calendar flips over to the 1st of October. At exactly midnight, the lights turn on. No one can explain it. The feed store, once a bustling hub for the town's farmers, sits dormant for 364 days of the year. The windows are covered in grime, the door is locked tight, and the shelves are empty, dusty skeletons of a business that once was. The sign, above the door, long faded, creaks in the wind. But when October 1st rolls around, something inside the store flickers to life. The lights, old and yellowed, buzz in the dark, casting an eerie glow onto the cracked concrete of the parking lot. It's as if the store itself is awakening, shaking off the decades of sleep to feed its hunger. They used to say the store was haunted, that the spirits of the workers who had once toiled away in the heat of summer were still stuck inside, unable to move on. But over the years, the story twisted. The rumors shifted from ghostly murmurs to something far darker, far more tangible. They started saying it wasn't ghosts at all. Something else lived in that old store. Something hungry. Lena Goodwin had heard the stories since she was a little girl. She grew up in Waxahachie, playing near the feed store's rusted fences, her parents warning her to stay away from it. She'd been curious then, like all children are, about the forbidden, but she hadn't really understood the warnings, not until the summer she turned 16. That summer, she learned that curiosity could kill, just like her father always said. It was a hot night in July when she saw the lights flicker on for the first time. It was nearly midnight. Lena was walking home from her shift at the diner, a bag of leftover pie in her hand, when she saw it. Johnson's Feed and Grain. The sign wasn't glowing, not exactly. It was just the lights inside, dim and sickly yellow, as if the store had just come alive for the first time in decades. Lena stopped in her tracks, her heart starting to pound. She wasn't sure why, but she was drawn to the place like a moth to a flame. She told herself it was just the heat, just the exhaustion. She needed to get home, not stand here gawking at the old store. But something inside her urged her forward, so she walked closer, as if something in the air was thickening around her. The darkness swallowed up everything else, but those lights, they were beckoning her. Lena didn't see anyone inside. No cars, no movement, just the faint, soft hum of electricity as it coursed through the wires. She crept to the door, thinking maybe she could take a look, maybe see what was going on, if only for a second. But when she touched the door handle, it was cold. Cold like ice, though it hadn't been cold outside. She hesitated for a moment, then twisted it. It gave way with a groan, and the door swung open. The lights inside flickered more violently now, casting strange, distorted shadows across the aisles. There was a chill in the air that wasn't just from the wind and the smell. God, the smell was thick, like rot mixed with something else. Something alive. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside. The old wooden floor creaked under her feet, but it was the emptiness of the place that made her feel like she was trespassing on something ancient. The shelves were bare, save for a few broken bags of feed that had spilled their contents out like empty carcasses. The walls were covered in peeling paint, the windows fogged up with dust. Yet the lights were on, buzzing erratically, and the air was thick with that unnatural cold. "Hello?" Lena called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Nothing moved. But then from somewhere deep inside the store she heard it. A scrape. A slow, steady scrape, like something dragging its feet across the floor. Lena's pulse spiked. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drumbeat, and a cold sweat broke out on her neck. She took a step back, ready to bolt. But then something else caught her ear, a sound she couldn't quite identify. It was low, guttural, like the growl of a dog, but far deeper, far more animalistic. And then, a whisper, a voice, soft and gravelly, like it had been buried alive for years. "Meat." Lena froze. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The hairs on the back of her neck stood straight up as the whisper came again. closer this time, as if it were right behind her. Her eyes darted around the darkened aisles, searching for any sign of life, any sign that this was just a prank, a joke. But nothing came. Nothing moved. That's when she heard it. The thing that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, slow, dragging steps, as though something was struggling to move its own weight. "Who's there?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't stop herself from asking, couldn't stop herself from trying to make sense of the madness she was hearing, but deep down, she already knew there was no making sense of it. Then, she saw it. From the darkness of the farthest aisle, something shuffled into the light. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its limbs gangly and crooked, dragging itself along. The floor with a limp that made the scrape sound louder. It was hunched, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, its mouth a gaping maw that seemed far too wide for its face, and its eyes, black as coal, glistened with an insatiable hunger. The thing paused, its head tilting to one side as it locked its gaze onto Lena. Its lips curled in a smile, revealing sharp teeth that glinted in the dim light. The smell of death and decay filled the air, and Lena felt her legs give out beneath her. But the thing didn't move. Not yet. It didn't have to. The hunger in its eyes said it all. Lena backed away, her heart racing as she stumbled toward the door. Her hand fumbled for the handle, but the thing stepped forward, its movements almost too quick to follow, blocking her exit. "Meat," it rasped again, its voice a low growl. Lena's stomach twisted in knots, but she didn't think. She just acted. She shoved against the door with all the strength she had left, and somehow, miraculously, it swung open. She bolted out into the night air, her feet pounding against the pavement as she ran toward the street, toward the lights of the town. She didn't stop until she was home, and even then she didn't sleep. Not that night. Not for many nights after. And every year when October rolls around, when the clock strikes midnight, Lena's mind is pulled back to Johnson's feed and grain. She can't help it. She hears the scrape of those dragging footsteps in the distance. She hears the whisper of hunger in the wind, and she knows the lights will come on again. And something will shop for meat. There are places in Galveston, Texas, where the fog comes in thick as velvet, crawling up from the Gulf of Mexico like a living thing, rolling in across the old brick streets and creeping through the tangled alleys. People who've lived there long enough know to stay inside when the fog arrives. It doesn't feel right, like the air's been cut with something unnatural, something old. But that's not what the stories are about. The stories are about the train, the one that appears on those foggy nights. No one knows exactly where it comes from, and after hearing the story, no one would want to find out. The first person to see the train was a man named George Montgomery. He was a logger, a good enough man, but a man who'd lived a life of excess in more ways than one. George had a penchant for whiskey and a knack for running from the things he didn't want to face, especially his past. That's why, when he came to Galveston in 1922, he was trying to escape a mess he'd made in Houston. But when the fog rolled in on a late night in October, George wasn't so much escaping as stumbling into something much worse. He had been at the bar on Strand Street, trying to drink away memories that had haunted him for years. The city had an odd sort of charm, an old-world feeling, as if it was just on the edge of something that no one was meant to understand. When the fog rolled in, thick as smoke, he didn't notice. Not at first. It wasn't until he walked out into the empty streets that he felt it, the silence. The kind of silence that seems to press down on you, making it hard to breathe, like the world is holding its breath. And then, in the distance, he heard it. A whistle. Low. Long. At first, George thought it was the wind, one of those strange drafts that could sneak through the alleys in Galveston. But the sound was so sharp, so clear, that it sent a shiver down his spine. It came again, louder this time, a sharp, haunting cry that rang out from somewhere behind the mist. And then, over the horizon, he saw it. The train. It was an old iron thing, black as pitch, with red eyes glowing through the fog. It moved slowly, almost as though it was gliding rather than running along the tracks, its wheels spinning without a sound, like it was riding on the fog itself. There were no lights, no headlights, just the eerie glow of the red lamps that hung on the sides of the cars. George stood frozen, his stomach churning, as the train drew closer. It didn't stop, didn't slow down. It just kept coming, churning, through the mist like a specter, its screeching whistle growing louder and louder until it was deafening. George could hear the clinking of the tracks, the rhythm of the train's movements, and yet, no passengers, no workers, nothing but the train itself. He took a step forward, compelled by a force he couldn't understand, a strange tug in his chest. As the train passed, his eyes fell on something else, something darker than the fog itself. The windows were black, but George could see something moving inside. Faces, twisted and pale. Not people, no, not people, but something other. Their eyes were wide, empty, gazing out from behind the iron bars like they were waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to see them. The whistle blew again, sharper now, as though it were calling to him, urging him closer. The train didn't stop. George's feet moved without him telling them to. He didn't know what was pulling him closer, whether it was his curiosity or something darker. But before he realized it, he was standing next to the tracks, watching the train pass just inches away. The smell of rust and decay hung in the air, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. A man, no, not a man, not anymore, was standing at the back of one of the cars, leaning out into the night, his eyes wide and empty, his mouth hanging open like he was trying to scream. But no sound came out. It was then that George heard the voice, soft at first, like a whisper carried on the breeze. "Come closer, George." It was his name, his own name, calling him, luring him into the depths of the fog. He staggered back, trying to fight it, trying to turn and run, but he couldn't. His legs were made of lead, his feet rooted to the ground, his body under the control of something far older than fear. The voice came again. "Come closer, George. The tracks are lost, and so are you." And then the train was gone. When it had passed, all that remained was a hollow silence that seemed to stretch on forever. George's breath came in ragged gasps, and for a moment he thought he was going to pass out. But he couldn't shake the feeling, the sensation that he had been drawn into something awful. He turned and ran, stumbling back into the fog, back into the streets. He tried to tell people what he'd seen, tried to explain it, but no one believed him. The train, they said, had been out of commission for decades. The tracks hadn't been used since the early 1900s, when the line had been abandoned. Yet, for years after, George couldn't escape the dream. Every night it came, the train, the whistle, the red lights, the faces in the windows. And in the dreams, those faces reached out, calling to him, pulling him toward the fog, toward the lost tracks. But George wasn't the only one to see it. People who lived on the outskirts of Galveston, the ones who stayed out late, the ones who wandered when they shouldn't, began to hear the train. They saw it too, creeping in on fog-choked nights, its whistle echoing through the mist. Some of them tried to run, some of them tried to outrun it, but none of them made it. It became known as the lost tracks of Galveston, the rail line that appeared only when the fog was thick enough to hide the truth. The train didn't carry passengers. It wasn't a part of this world. It was something older, something that had been forgotten in the folds of time, and it didn't collect people. No, it collected souls, and those who heard the whistle knew it was too late. The train was coming for them. They say the worst thing that can happen to a place like Pine Shadow Hospital isn't the disease that seeps in through its sterile corridors or the trauma that slithers in on the heels of every emergency. It's the fire. Fires don't care about medicine, they don't care about healing, and they certainly don't care about the dead. They eat everything, flesh, bone, and memory. The fire at Pine Shadow took the 3rd floor, and with it the lives of several patients who'd never walked out of those rooms. Those patients, the ones who died there, were never listed in any report, never counted in any official death toll. The hospital had already begun sweeping things under the rug when they started rebuilding. The wreckage was cleaned up quickly. They patched the walls and painted over the scorch marks, but there was no saving that floor. Too many lives had been swallowed by the flames. So they did what hospitals do best. They closed it off and locked the door. But the third floor didn't stay shut. The elevator still stopped there. It wasn't supposed to be like that. The third floor was abandoned, condemned and marked for demolition. Nothing should have been left. Nothing should have been able to exist there. But it didn't matter what the administrators said, or how many times they scrubbed the place clean. The elevator would always stop on that floor, and the doors would always open. It was 3:17 a.m. the first time it happened to Ellie Walker. She was a night shift nurse, one of the few who'd been working at Pine Shadow for more than 5 years. She knew the building like she knew her own skin, each floor, each hallway, every turn and bend. But the third floor? She'd never been there. Not since the fire. She wasn't even sure if the doors still existed, but she had heard the stories, the rumors that circulated among the nurses in whispered tones, things they said when the night grew long, things they said just before the morning shift arrived. And the haze of exhaustion was thick enough to make anything seem possible. The third floor was where it all began. That night, Ellie had been doing her rounds in the emergency ward, checking on the few patients who'd been unlucky enough to end up in the hospital in the middle of the night. She wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Just another night where the world was quiet. The lights flickered a little too often, and the hum of the hospital machines created a rhythm she had learned to fall asleep to. It was just past 3 a.m. when the elevator doors opened in front of her. Ellie had been standing at the nurse's station when she heard the soft ding and saw the elevator light flicker. She didn't think much of it. Nurses on the night shift had learned to ignore the quirks of Pine Shadow. The lights sometimes buzzed, the temperature would fluctuate from freezing to sweltering in a matter of minutes, and the air conditioning always seemed to be a little off, a little too cold or too warm, as though the building itself couldn't make up its mind. The elevator was another thing to add to the list of things she had learned to overlook. But this time the doors didn't open to the usual floor. They opened to the third floor. Ellie stared at the dim hallway beyond the doors. Her hand instinctively reached for the call button to shut the doors, but something held her in place. She didn't know what it was. Perhaps it was the slow, nagging curiosity, the feeling of something wrong pulling at her. But instead of slamming the button, she stepped closer. She had to know. She didn't understand what she was seeing at first. The hallway was dark, much darker than it should have been. The faint flicker of the emergency lights above cast long shadows that didn't seem to move, as though the shadows themselves were stuck. She squinted into the gloom, hearing the hum of old broken air conditioning, but no voices, no signs of life. Her feet took a step forward, and her heart slammed into her ribs. It was wrong. The floor should have been empty, but there was a cold, creeping sensation curling its way up her spine, like she was being watched. She turned around just to make sure she was still on the same level, but the elevator doors remained open, and the hallway seemed to stretch forward, pulling her deeper into its web. "Hello?" Ellie called, her voice cracking slightly. "Is anyone there?" But there was no answer. Instead, she heard something she wasn't expecting, a faint, low sound. It was like a groan, a long, drawn-out sound, almost like someone was in pain. It was then that the doors slammed shut behind her. She spun around, her heart racing. The elevator was gone. The sound of the doors closing echoed like the finality of a tombstone dropping into place. She had no choice. She could either walk forward into that cold darkness or wait for a passing nurse to come by and hit the button to call the elevator back. Her fingers twitched toward the call button, but the hallway ahead of her seemed to suck the air from her lungs. She chose to walk. Her steps were shaky, the soles of her shoes barely making a sound against the slick linoleum floors. She walked toward the first door she saw, a patient's room. Or it should have been a patient's room. She didn't know what to expect, but she wasn't expecting this. The door creaked open with a gust of air that sent a shiver through her. The room inside was perfect. Too perfect. A sterile white room with polished floors, fresh sheets on the bed, a table by the window with a chair turned toward the empty, moonlit streets outside. There was no sound, no beeping monitors, no nurse's station buzz, just silence. The only thing out of place was the shadow that loomed at the edge of the room. Ellie froze. A feeling of dread washed over her like a cold wave. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and the room suddenly changed. The sheets weren't white anymore. They were stained, dark red, like someone had bled out in that bed. The walls began to close in, pushing inward, and Ellie could hear whispers now, soft and insistent, like the soft scraping of nails on wood. "Come closer." The voice was faint, but it was there. Before she could move, a figure appeared in the doorway. A man, slumped and sickly, his face pale and mottled with burns, his body bent at strange angles. "Help me," he whispered. Ellie backed away, but she couldn't move fast enough. The man's arms reached out, his fingers crooked and long, grasping at the air, and as the whisper became a shrill cry, Ellie ran. She ran down the hallway, tearing past doors that opened and shut on their own. Some of them whispered names. Some of them were empty. But one thing was for sure. The third floor was never truly abandoned. Not after the fire. Ellie made it to the elevator, her fingers trembling as she hit the call button, her heart thudding in her chest. The doors opened, but they weren't right. She stepped in, and the doors slammed shut behind her. She barely caught her breath before the elevator began to ascend, carrying her back to the safety of the first floor. But as the elevator dinged and opened onto the main floor, she heard it. A voice, faint and distant, whispered her name. Ellie. She glanced back over her shoulder as the doors closed, but when she looked back, she swore she saw something, just for a moment, a shadow standing at the edge of the third floor doors. The floor was still there. The third floor would always be there, and it would always call. Lake Travis stretches out in front of you, a glassy mirror that reflects the ever-changing skies of central Texas. But beneath the surface, something darker lurks. They say it's just the lake's natural silence. No noise except the occasional splash of a fish or the soft ripple of a boat slicing through the water. But sometimes if you're out there at just the right hour, and if the moon happens to be full, the silence isn't what you hear. It's something else. It's the sound of a boy's laughter, soft and high-pitched. But it isn't the kind of laughter you'd expect. It's a sound that twists your gut, that makes your skin itch. A voice that seems too young, too wrong, like a child who hasn't been alive in decades. They say he drowned in 1982. A tragedy, a mistake. A boy named Billy Hartman who'd been swimming with his friends, all of them just a little too reckless, a little too confident. He swam too far out. The waters were deeper, the undercurrent stronger than they realized, and before anyone could pull him back, the boy was gone. His friends were left clutching the water, screaming his name into the stillness, but the lake had swallowed him whole. The search parties combed the shores, the divers went down again and again, but Billy Hartman was never found. At least that's the story. But some of the locals say that's not quite what happened. They say Billy Hartman didn't die at all. Not completely, anyway. One of the first people to see Billy after the drowning was a fisherman named Roy Peterson, an older man who'd been working the lake for years. He didn't think much of the boy's laughter at first. Roy had always chalked up strange noises to the quirks of nature. But one evening, after a long day spent casting his line into the dark, something pulled him toward the water's edge. He said it was the voice, sweet and distant, drifting on the air. It was a faint whisper at first, the voice of a child calling for help. Then, as he peered out across the water, Roy saw something moving near the shoreline. He thought it was just a log floating on the surface, the wind pushing it gently back and forth. But as he leaned in closer, trying to get a better look, he realized the shape was too small, too human. He could see the shape of a boy, swimming, but there was something about him that didn't seem right. The water rippled unnaturally around him, almost as if the boy were gliding through it, moving effortlessly without a single splash. And then, Roy saw the boy's face, pale under the moonlight, his hair dark and wet, clinging to his forehead. The boy was smiling. That's when Roy's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a smile. It was too wide, stretching impossibly across the boy's face, almost unnaturally so, like something you might see in a nightmare. The smile never reached his eyes, though. Those were dark and empty, like deep, hollow pits where life used to. Roy called out to the boy, his voice a croak in the still night air. "Hey kid, what are you doing out there? It's too late to be swimming." The boy didn't answer. Instead, he just kept swimming closer, and with each stroke it seemed like the boy was getting bigger, not physically but in presence, like the shadows themselves were pulling him into existence. The pale face, the hollow eyes, the impossible grin, all of it began to pull at Roy's mind like it was growing too real, too monstrous. Before he could call out again, before he could move, the boy stopped swimming. He looked at Roy, and then, with that same unnatural smile, he waved, a slow, deliberate wave, and then he disappeared beneath the water. Roy waited, staring at the spot where the boy had vanished. His pulse thudded in his ears, but the water stayed still. The breeze died. And then, just as Roy was about to turn away, he heard it. That same laughter, distant but unmistakable. It floated toward him, carried on the night air, drifting like the smell of something long dead. After that night, Roy never went back to that spot on the lake again. He told people what he saw, but nobody believed him. They said he was just an old man, imagining things, seeing ghosts where there were none. They all dismissed it. But it wasn't just Roy. It wasn't just a fisherman's tale. Over the years, more people started reporting sightings of the boy. Locals, visitors, anyone who wandered too close to the lake at night. They'd hear that laugh, soft and teasing, floating in the air, like a voice calling them into the water. People would stand at the edge of the lake, looking out, trying to make out the shape of the boy beneath the waves. Sometimes they'd see him, pale and smiling, floating on the surface, beckoning them closer. They'd call out to him, but he wouldn't speak. He'd just keep smiling, his head tilting slightly to the side, like he was waiting. And then he'd wave. It wasn't always the same person who saw him, but the boy was always the same, always there, always smiling. And after each sighting, someone would disappear. It started with small things. Fishermen's boats lost, never to be found, like they sank into the bottom of the lake without a trace. But soon, it was worse. A woman named Sarah Jennings, out for a midnight swim with her husband, swam too far, and when she called out to him for help, he couldn't find her. The police search turned up nothing, just the faintest traces of something, a trail of bubbles rising from the lake's depths, and her pale, lifeless body found floating several days later in the very same spot where Roy had seen the boy. And that's the thing about Billy Hartman. The boy doesn't care who you are. Doesn't matter if you're a fisherman or a tourist or someone out for a late-night swim. If you see him, if you hear him laugh, if you hear him call your name in that soft sing-song voice, you're already too far gone. It's like something has changed in the water, something ancient, something alive, something hungry. The boy, he doesn't just drown you. He takes you into the deep and you join him there under the surface forever. And every time the moon is full, every time the water is still, Billy Hartman will be waiting. With that smile, always smiling, always waving, always waiting for the next one to come. The fields outside Amarillo stretch on for miles, a never-ending expanse of green and gold as far as the eye can see. When the wind picks up, it sweeps over the acres of corn stalks like a whisper, swaying them in rhythmic patterns, giving the impression that the land itself is alive, breathing. People don't talk about it much, but those who've lived in these parts for a long time know one thing for sure. Something about these fields is wrong. Every harvest season, when the corn is ripe and the air starts to smell of earth and dust, it begins. It's subtle at first, just a shift in the wind, a faint rustling in the stalks that shouldn't be there. The ground hums with something that doesn't belong. But if you're brave enough to stay out there after dark, to keep working the lay, Fields long after everyone else has packed up and gone home. That's when you see it. That's when the eyes begin to glow. They appear first as little dots of light, flickering faintly between the rows of corn. At first you think it's just a trick of the light or a reflection of a distant vehicle's headlights. But it's never a car. It's never a vehicle. It's something else entirely. That's what Roy Tilden learned one late fall night in 1993, when he was out harvesting with his father. Roy had just turned 17, and the thought of being out there alone in the fields with his father, working until the air grew cold and the stars glittered overhead, had once been comforting. But not that night. Not with the way the wind sounded, like something was calling out to him. Not with the way the earth seemed to pulse beneath his feet, and definitely not with those damn eyes, those burning, glowing eyes that flickered like headlights, barely visible from between the stalks. "Pa?" Roy asked, his voice rough from the dry air. "You see that?" His father, Ben Tilden, was a hard man, the kind of person who didn't believe in nonsense. He was used to working in the fields at all hours, used to the strange things that happened. At harvest time, the rustling sounds, the soft scratching noises that came from beneath the earth. He never questioned the land. It was the land, and if you had any respect for it, it would give back to you. But that night something had changed. Something in the air was different. Ben didn't look at Roy. He didn't look at the fields. His eyes were fixed on something ahead, something further down the rows, and his lips were pulled tight. "Don't look at it, Roy," he muttered. "Just keep your head down, don't go looking." But Roy's curiosity got the better of him. He was always asking questions, always poking around when he shouldn't. He turned, despite his father's warning, and he looked out across the rows of corn. That's when he saw them, the eyes. Two glowing orbs that stood out against the dark backdrop of the stalks, gleaming like the headlights of a car in the distance. But there was no car, no headlights. And then the voice came. "Roy." It wasn't a whisper, but it wasn't loud either. It was soft, like a memory, like something that shouldn't have been able to speak but did. The sound settled deep in his chest, warm and comforting, like the voice of someone he loved, the voice of someone he knew. It was a voice he had heard thousands of times before, a voice he had once spent years of his life listening to, cherishing. It was the voice of his father. "Roy, come closer." Roy's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It was the voice of Ben Tilden, his father, a man who had been dead for over 5 years. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But the voice came again, and this time it was closer. "Roy, come closer. I need you, son. Come to me." The hairs on the back of Roy's neck stood on end. He could hear the crunch of footsteps in the dirt, though no one was walking. He could see the glow of those eyes moving now, crawling closer between the stalks, their gleaming light growing brighter, their gaze sharper. And then he heard the rustling, like something was shifting beneath the earth, like it was crawling through the very soil beneath him. "Pa," Roy whispered, turning to his father. But Ben Tilden was gone. There was no one beside him. His father's figure had vanished into the corn, leaving only the soft hum of the wind in his wake. Roy's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what he should do. The eyes kept getting closer. The voice, that terrible voice, kept calling to him. He turned and ran. But the fields weren't as they had been when he arrived. The stalks twisted and tangled together, like they were reaching out for him, like they were pulling him deeper into the earth. The ground felt spongy beneath his boots, like it was sucking him in, and with every step, the voice grew louder. "Roy, you can't run from me, you never could." Then, with a loud snap, the stalks parted, and there it was. A figure. Tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch and bend at unnatural angles. Its body was a writhing mass of shadows. But those eyes, they were unmistakable. They glowed like headlights, wide and unblinking, watching him, drawing him in, pulling him closer. And in the center of it all, that voice again, warm and soft, like it was his father's very soul calling to him from beyond the grave. "You're coming home, Roy," the voice said, and the thing's mouth stretched open, impossibly wide, its jaw dislocating like a snake's. "It's time. You've always belonged to me. We've been waiting for you." And then the thing crawled forward, its eyes locked on his, and Roy screamed as it reached for him, its skeletal hand stretching out from the darkness, its fingers long and hollow, its touch cold like the grave. But before it could grab him, the wind picked up and the figure stopped. It retreated into the shadows, its eyes fading to a dim glow as it backed away into the cornfields, leaving nothing but the silence behind. The voice was gone. The eyes disappeared. Roy didn't remember how he made it back to his truck. He didn't remember much of anything after that night. But the next day, the harvest was finished. The fields were empty, and for the first time in years, the Tilden farm stood silent. Tyler, Texas isn't much of a place to be, especially not if you're looking for excitement. It's a town built on slow days and quiet nights, where everything moves at its own pace, and people stay long enough to get comfortable. But there's one shop there, hidden down an alley just off the main square, that doesn't quite fit. They say it's been there forever, and maybe it has. The sign in the window says Whitley's Antiques in faded gold lettering, like it's begging you to come in, but not too fast, and certainly not too willingly. I'd walked past that shop 100 times, and I never felt anything more than mild curiosity. The place was dusty, full of things you couldn't name, half buried under a shroud of forgotten history. But there was one item that always caught my eye, a grandfather clock standing tall and proud at the back of the store near the window. Its face was ornate, with intricate carvings of vines and symbols I couldn't quite make out. And most striking of all, the hands on the clock's face didn't seem to follow any kind of normal pattern. The minute hand moved backward. It ran, in reverse. The first time I saw it, I had just stepped into Whitley's Antiques on a whim. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of old wood and dust. I can't explain why, but something about that clock gave me chills. It wasn't just the reverse ticking, though that was eerie enough. There was something about it that drew you in like a slow pull, the kind that happens when you don't realize you're already in danger. I'd asked the shopkeeper about it, an old man with more wrinkles than I could count, his face as lined as the cracks in the walls of the shop. His eyes were clouded but sharp, like he could see right through you. He had a slow, deliberate way of speaking, and when he told me about the clock, I almost didn't believe him. "That clock," he said, his voice low, almost reverent, "has been here as long as I can remember. It's not like any other. Time runs backward in it, you see. And those who listen long enough, well, they see what it shows. They see the moment of their death." I laughed. It seemed ridiculous, but I felt the oddest prickle on the back of my neck. "Moment of death?" I scoffed. "You're telling me it shows when I'm gonna die?" The old man nodded slowly. "Not just when. How and why." I didn't believe him then. How could I? It was just a clock, an antique, a novelty, nothing more. But something in his eyes held me there, made me want to stay. I asked him if it worked. He gave me a smile that wasn't really a smile, just a strange twisting of his lips. "Come back tomorrow night. You'll see for yourself." So I did. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought it would be a good story. Maybe I thought it would be funny. But as soon as I walked back into that shop, the air felt different. The lights seemed dimmer, the shadows deeper. The clock ticked in that odd reversed rhythm, and my heart thudded in time with it, like something was calling me toward it. The shopkeeper didn't say a word. He just nodded toward the clock, and I found myself stepping closer, the wood beneath my feet creaking with every step. The closer I got, the louder the ticking sounded, until it filled my ears, vibrating in my skull. The second hand swept in, reverse. It was hypnotic. I stood there for a moment, just listening, until the air in the room seemed to freeze, and then for the first time, I saw it. The face of the clock blurred, and I blinked, thinking it was just my eyes playing tricks. But no. There, in the glass beneath the golden hands of the clock, I saw a scene. It wasn't my death, not at first. It was a place, a street, dark and wet, lit only by the flickering light of a street lamp. There were people walking, but none of them looked real. They moved like shadows, slipping in and out of sight, their faces obscured. And then I saw him, a figure hunched with long, dirty hair hanging in front of his face. I couldn't make out his features, but I could feel him staring at me. I snapped back, my heart pounding, sweat beaded on my forehead. I looked at the clock, but the hands had changed. They were no longer ticking backward. They were still, frozen. The clock had stopped, and in the silence that followed, I could hear my own breathing. Heavy, panicked. But then something strange happened. The old man was standing behind me, his voice barely a whisper. The clock shows you the moment you were meant to die. I turned, my mouth dry, and tried to speak, but my throat closed up. The clock doesn't show the future, he continued, stepping closer. It shows the what could have been, the should have been. He gave a soft chuckle. The moment you should have died but didn't. Not yet, but you will. It's waiting for you. I couldn't make sense of his words. It was as if he was reading my mind, but he wasn't. He was speaking the truth. The scene in the clock's face. It was showing me something I hadn't remembered. A place I'd been before, a street I'd walked down in the rain, a man in the shadows. And then I saw it. The moment I was meant to die. The moment I had somehow escaped, but only for now. The clock ticked again, the hands moving backward, pulling me into the past, showing me the car crash. The crash I had survived, the one that should have killed me. It was then I realized that the clock wasn't just showing the moment of my death. It was showing the moment I should have died, but didn't. The shopkeeper's voice came again, his words almost a warning now. That's how it works. The clock shows you the moment you escape death, but it won't forget. It never forgets. The day will come when it remembers, and then the clock will call for you. I tried to leave, but the shopkeeper's gaze was like iron. He didn't have to tell me to stay. The clock had already decided. Time was a cycle, a spiral, and I'd already broken it once. But I wouldn't break it again. Not without consequence. Haven't been back to Tyler since that night, and I haven't seen the clock again. But sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I hear it, ticking backward, counting down to something I can't escape. And I know. The clock is waiting. Rest Haven Cemetery sits on the edge of Laredo, Texas, quiet and shaded by towering old oaks whose roots stretch deep into the earth like veins of some ancient creature. If you didn't know it was there, you could miss it altogether. A small plot surrounded by a rusted iron fence, forgotten by most and only noticed by those who had business with the dead. They say the place has always had a chill about it, a hum in the air, like the ground itself was holding its breath. The locals, the ones who lived on the outskirts of town, knew all about the cemetery's peculiarities. They didn't talk about it much, at least not in daylight. It was the kind of thing you only whispered about in the dark, when the wind picked up and the trees creaked like old bones. It started years ago, long before the rumors began to spread. At first it was nothing more than a strange sound, something that drifted on the wind in the stillness of night. Those who lived closest to the cemetery heard it first, soft at first, like the murmur of a choir, distant but clear, as if 100 voices were singing. But from where? From beneath the earth, perhaps. By the time the sun set on the old town of Laredo, the sound would rise, slow and deliberate. Hymns, so sweet, so eerie, they carried through the streets, winding their way down alleys, sneaking through cracks, in doors and windows, until it seemed as if the whole town was held in the grip of that haunting melodic hymn. They said it came from Rest Haven Cemetery, though no one was brave enough to step foot in the graveyard after the sun dipped below the horizon. But then, the real trouble started. It was a summer night, the kind that swelled with heat and suffocating humidity. Raul Garcia, a truck driver who'd lived in Laredo his whole life, made a bet with his friends at a local bar. He was tired of hearing the stories, tired of the superstitions, and he was willing to put it to the test. They laughed, calling him Crazy, but Raoul wasn't one to back down. "I'll spend the night in the cemetery," he boasted, tipping his beer bottle with a grin. "I'll stand at the crypts and listen to your damn choir. It's just wind and the rustling of trees. I'll be back by morning laughing at all of you." His friends laughed too, but there was a nervousness behind their chuckles. They had heard the hymns before, just like everyone else. But Raoul didn't listen to fear. He paid for his beer, clapped his friends on the back, and walked into the night, the darkness swallowing him whole. At Rest Haven, the air felt heavier, more oppressive, as though the earth itself was holding him in place. The cemetery's iron gates creaked open as Raoul stepped inside. The trees rustled overhead, casting long skeletal shadows across the ground. And then, faintly, so faint he wasn't sure if he imagined it, he heard it. The hymn. A soft, haunting melody drifting on the wind. Raoul stood for a moment, just listening. The sound was beautiful, almost hypnotic. He could feel it in his bones, vibrating through the soles of his shoes. But he wasn't scared. Not yet. Not until he noticed something else. There was movement. Not in the trees. Not in the wind. Something shifted beneath the ground. The air grew colder, though it was still summer. And then, just as the sound of the hymn began to swell in volume, Raoul felt it. A tug, a pull in the pit of his stomach. He turned toward the old crypt at the center of the cemetery, where the hymn seemed to emanate from, like it was coming from deep within the earth. He started walking toward it, his feet carrying him of their own accord, as though some unseen hand was guiding him. The hymn grew louder now, impossibly so, filling his ears, pulsing in his chest. It was no longer a mere song. It was a calling, a voice that seemed to reach out to him, beckoning him closer. Raoul stood at the crypt's entrance, a dark maw in the earth. He could see nothing inside, only the shadows, but the sound. It was so close now, the voices surrounding him. He felt as though they were all around him, suffocating him with their tune. And then, his breath hitched. From inside the crypt came a soft rustling, then something worse. The hymn had changed. No longer sweet, it became darker, more frantic. The voices, they were changing. And then he heard it. A voice, distinct from the others, calling out to him. "Come closer, Raoul." His heart slammed in his chest. He froze. The voice. It sounded like his mother's voice. But that wasn't possible. His mother had died when he was a boy. She had been buried in the cemetery, like so many others. But now she was calling him, singing his name in a voice that was both tender and terrifying. His feet moved before his mind could catch up. He didn't want to go in, but his legs carried him, inch by inch, toward the crypt's mouth. Hio reached the door. The hymn rose to a crescendo. It was deafening now, the music thundering in his skull, urging him forward. His hand gripped the cold stone of the crypt, pushing the door open. Inside there was nothing but darkness. But the hymn, it was so close it felt as if it was right beside him. "Raoul," the voice sang again, but this time it was not his mother's voice. No, this voice was something different. It was his own voice. "Come closer, Raoul. Stay with us. Forever." He stumbled back, his breath ragged. But the voice followed him. The hymn followed him. It wrapped around him, encircling him like a thick fog. Raoul felt the world start to tilt, felt his heart race faster, the ground beneath his feet shaking as though something was stirring below. The voices, the hymn, they began to fill his mind, his very soul. Raoul ran. He couldn't hear his own footsteps over the music, but he kept running, kept pushing himself faster until the cemetery gates were in sight. But when he reached the gates, they didn't open. And then he heard it. The music stopped. And in that eerie silence, the voice called one last time, a whisper, a command. "Stay. Forever." Raoul never made it out of the cemetery. The next morning, his body was found just outside the gates, still clutching at the air, his mouth open as though he'd been screaming. But there was no trace of the hymn, no sign of what had taken him. The locals say the choir still sings in the cemetery, its voices reaching for those who wander too close. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear them. You'll hear your own voice, calling you to stay. Forever. And when the last note plays, you'll hum along. It had been years since anyone in San Angelo had driven past the old Sunset Drive-In theater. The rusted sign with its faded neon lights that used to flicker in bursts of red and yellow hung like a forgotten memory, sagging under the weight of time. The theater was abandoned, closed down in the late 70s when the town's movie buffs moved on to the multiplexes downtown. The place had been left to rot, its screens overrun with vines and moss, its concession stand silent and decaying. But there was still something magnetic about it. The teens in San Angelo didn't talk about it often. There was something about that place, a darkness that settled deep into the bones when you even thought about it. Still, every few months when summer stretched the days long and hot, a dare would rise among the local kids. A dare to go to the drive-in after midnight, to sit in the cracked, broken seats, and to watch the movie that played by itself. They called it the Devil's Picture Show. It started, like most of these things do, with a whisper, a rumor that trickled down the halls of the high school, passed like an infected breath from mouth to mouth. If you go out to the old drive-in, the movie still plays. That's how it all began. The rumor was simple, too simple almost. The kind of thing that could be shrugged off if you were sensible, if you had the capacity to think things through. But a group of teens, a tight-knit crew with names like Kelly, Danny, and Trevor, were the kind that didn't give much thought to rumors. They liked the thrill. They liked the challenge. The night they decided to go was hotter than most. The Texas heat had been sweltering for days, sticking to the skin like glue, and the stars above shimmered in an almost unreal way, as though they were watching, waiting for something to happen. Kelly was the ringleader, the one who started the dare. Danny was always quick to laugh it off, but had a strange, almost excited glint in his eyes whenever they talked about it. Trevor, on the other hand, was the skeptic, the one who thought it was all just a game. A bit of fun for bored teens in a town too small to matter. "Tonight's the night," Kelly said as she pulled up in her beat-up Chevy. The engine sputtered a little before finally roaring to life. The others piled in, half drunk on the excitement of it all. It was just after midnight when they reached the drive-in. The place was swallowed by shadows, the once vibrant ticket booth now a skeletal frame, a few panes of glass still intact but shattered. The screens loomed in the distance, looming like monsters waiting for their prey. "You really think the movie still plays?" Trevor asked as they parked under the withered marquee. "Hell yeah," Kelly said, already sliding out of the car, her bare feet crunching on the gravel. "People say it's just there. You show up, you sit down, and it just starts. Doesn't matter if no one's around." The group sat up in front of the large screen, nervously glancing around, but none of them dared to speak. There was an eerie, silent hum in the air, a quiet hum that filled the spaces between their words like an insect buzzing in the background. And then, without warning, the lights flickered. The screen, cracked and dirty, blinked once, then twice. For a moment, they all just stood there, frozen in place, eyes wide, unsure of what to do. "I thought you said," Trevor began, but Kelly's raised hand silenced him. And then the film started. It wasn't like any movie they had ever seen before. The film grain was thick, like something out of the 1940s, with jittery black and white footage that flickered violently against the screen. The sound was warped, barely recognizable. But what really chilled them was the fact that they were all watching it, watching themselves. Danny was the first to notice it, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's me. That's me in the movie." The figure on the screen looked like him, exactly like him. But it wasn't just him. It was all of them, standing in the same positions as they were, sitting where they sat. It was like the film had captured them in real time, and the movie was showing their every move, their every action right before their eyes. Trevor laughed nervously. Okay, I don't know how this is happening, but it's creepy as hell." but no one laughed with him. They were too busy watching as the scene unfolded, inching closer to a part none of them had been prepared for. The movie flickered again, then cut to a new scene. Now, it wasn't just a shadow of their lives. It was something different, something darker. On the screen, Kelly was running through the rows of seats, her expression twisted with terror. Behind her, something chased her, its shape just a dark blur. Trevor saw the way the shadow moved, a strange, inhuman glide that made his stomach churn. "It's not real," Danny muttered, but there was a tremor in his voice. "It's just a movie. It can't be real." But as Kelly turned, gasping for breath, she saw it. The thing that chased her. A dark, hulking figure, too big to be human, with eyes that burned through the screen and pierced through her soul. She screamed, and in that instant, all of them screamed. They were no longer watching a movie. The sound of Kelly's scream echoed in the still air, mingling with their own, as they realized what was happening. They were watching themselves die. It wasn't just Kelly. It wasn't just the shadow. It was them all, caught in a reel of torment and agony, the images flickering faster now like a warped tape that had been played far too long. Danny's image appeared next, his eyes wide with terror as the figure loomed behind him, pulling him into the darkness. Trevor ran, but he was tripped by a shadowy hand that reached out from the screen and dragged him into the depths of the film. Then it was Kelly again, running toward the screen, toward them, but something was wrong. The film didn't show her running toward them. It showed her running toward her death. Her body was pulled into the air, her limbs twisted in unnatural ways, her scream still echoing long after she was gone. The final image was of the figure standing in the center of the screen, its face a featureless void of darkness. It didn't need eyes. It didn't need a mouth. It was death. And it was waiting. The movie stopped. The screen went black. The sound of crickets and distant traffic filled the silence. For a long time, none of them spoke. They just sat there, staring at the blank screen, waiting for something to happen, wondering if they were really still alive. But no one dared to speak. None of them ever spoke about what happened that night. Some say they were never seen again. Others claim that they left town, moved far away, trying to escape the memory of the Devil's Picture show. But if you listen close enough on some quiet night, you might hear the sounds of their screams echoing from the old drive-in. And if you get too close, if you dare to look, you might just see them, watching, waiting, ready for the next round of fools to dare to watch their own deaths. And when the screen flickers again, you'll know the movie's begun, and you're the star. The road that winds between Uvalde and Leakey isn't much to look at. It's a long stretch of asphalt that carves its way through the Texas hill country, cutting through patches of mesquite trees and dry, rocky soil. There are no billboards, no gas stations, just the occasional farmhouse, lonely and distant. It's the kind of place where you can drive for miles without seeing another soul, where the only sound is the hum of your tires on the road and the distant calls of hawks in the heat of the afternoon. But when the rain comes, the road changes. The air gets heavy, thick with moisture, and the sky turns a sickly gray. The rain falls hard, soaking the earth and turning the roads slick and dangerous. When the storms roll in, the landscape takes on an unnatural hush, like the world is holding its breath. The rain doesn't wash away the darkness. It deepens it. And that's when he appears. They don't know his name. Hell, no one knows much about him at all. They only know what they see. And what they see is enough to make anyone think twice before picking up a stranger during a rainstorm. It starts with the flash of headlights cutting through the rain, casting shadows that flicker and bend in the mist. You don't see him at first, not until you're too close, until it's almost too late. He's standing there in the ditch, half hidden by the tall grass, his figure blurry in the downpour, like a wraith caught between the living and the dead. He's tall, unnaturally tall, and his clothes are soaked through, dark and clinging to his body. But it's not his clothes that make your heart stop. It's his face, or the lack of it. There's nothing there. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Just a smooth, featureless expanse of skin where a face should be. pale and sickly looking under the rain. It's like a mask made of flesh, empty and impossible. It's a sight that makes your blood run cold, your stomach twist into knots, but it's the kind of thing that makes you hesitate. You wonder if you're seeing things. You wonder if it's just the rain playing tricks on your mind, but you can't shake the feeling. Something isn't right. And that's when he raises his arm. It's a small gesture at first, just a flick of the wrist, but it's enough to signal that he's asking for a ride, asking for help like 1,000 hitchhikers before him. The arm is trembling, like he's been standing there in the rain for a long time. His body is soaked, and the water runs off his form in thin rivulets, blending with the rain on the road. But he doesn't shiver. He doesn't make a sound. He just stands there waiting for you to make the decision. Most people slow down when they see him, even though something deep inside them tells them they shouldn't. Some people speed up, pretending they didn't see him, their eyes locked on the road ahead, praying the rain will clear enough so they can leave this strange figure behind. But not everyone is lucky. Not everyone can shake the feeling that something's pulling them in. It's like he has a hold on you, like he's inside your head, whispering your name, calling you to stop. And so, you pull over. It's always a mistake. The man, if you can call him that, climbs into your car without a word. His body shifts as he moves, like his bones don't quite fit together the right way. The seat creaks under the unnatural weight of his presence, but he doesn't seem to care. His head tilts slightly to one side, as if he's listening to something you can't hear, as if he's waiting for something to happen. He doesn't speak. He doesn't look at you. But his presence is so overwhelming, so unnatural, that you can feel his eyes, even though you know there are no eyes to feel. It's at that moment, when the car starts moving again, that you realize how wrong everything feels. The air in the car grows thick, like it's harder to breathe, like the oxygen is being sucked out of the space. You're not alone anymore. Not in the way you thought you were. There's something in the car with you, something that doesn't belong. And then it happens. You glance over at the man in the passenger seat. The rain is coming down harder now, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. The headlights cast fleeting shadows that dance across the interior of the car. In those moments between the flashes of light, you see it. His head, tilted just a little too far, his hands resting in his lap, pale and long, almost skeletal. But there's something else now, something you didn't see before. A slight shift in the air, like the world has suddenly turned upside down. When you turn your head back to the road, it's too late. You feel it first, the weight pressing down on your chest. You feel like the air has gotten thicker, like it's becoming harder to breathe. Your heart starts to race, but it's too slow to match the panic rising in your throat. There's a sudden suffocating pressure around you, as if the world is closing in. And you know that the man in the passenger seat isn't just a stranger. He's something else, something worse. And then the whispers start. Soft at first, like a low murmur in the back of your mind. You can't understand them at first. They're just noise, faint and distant. But as you drive, the whispers grow louder, sharper, more insistent. They're like fingers scraping across your soul, pulling at your thoughts, ripping at your sanity. You can't escape them. You can't make them stop. They're inside your head now, burrowing deeper and deeper until all you hear is the voice. The voices calling to you. And that's when you look back at him. The man's head is now turned completely to face you. His body is unnaturally still, his mouth opening slightly as if he's about to speak. But he doesn't. The moment his mouth opens, you hear it. It's a sound like dry leaves scraping against the wind. A hollow, terrible sound. And then you feel it. The air grows colder. The whispers turn into words. You should not have stopped, they say, in a voice that sounds like 1,000 people whispering at once. You will never leave. The fear hits you like a freight train. Your heart hammers in your chest, but it's not fast enough. You try to slam on the brakes, but they won't respond. The steering wheel feels heavy in your hands. The rain is falling harder now, like a curtain of water, and the road ahead is swallowed by shadows. The headlights can't cut through it, you can't see the road anymore, and just like that, the car stops moving. The man thing is gone. The car, the road, the rain, they're all gone. You've stopped, but the world hasn't. You're trapped, lost in that endless, featureless place where the rain never stops falling, where the man in the ditch waits for the next driver to make the same mistake. The whispers fill the space around you, and you realize too late that you've made the wrong turn, and that's how it ends. At least that's how it ends for you, because anyone who picks up the man in the ditch, they never come back. Not alive anyway. Liberty Hill, Texas wasn't a place that seemed like it would make it into any sort of history book. It was the kind of town people forgot about once they left it. Small, dusty, and caught in the tight grip of time, just on the edge of nowhere. The town's roads were cracked and crooked, and the once vibrant main street now bore the scars of time. Peeling paint, broken windows, and faded signs that looked like ghosts of their former selves. It was one of those towns where everything was either too hot or too cold, too dry or too wet, never quite in the sweet spot of comfort. The people there were used to the weather. They knew the storms would come, as they always did, raging down from the hill country and battering the town with a violence that only the Texas sky could muster. There were storms, and then there were storms. This one, however, felt different from the start. It started like any other on a late August evening, the air heavy with humidity, the sky darkening with thunderclouds. There was a breeze, but it wasn't a comforting one. It felt like the kind of wind that would blow the doors off your house if you let it. By the time the storm hit, the first crack of thunder sounded like a warning. Then came the wind, roaring through the streets, shaking the old wooden houses and making the trees bend in unnatural ways. That night, the storm felt alive. The kind of storm that made you wonder if God himself was looking down, shaking his head and wondering why he'd ever bothered to make a place like Liberty Hill. The sky opened up, and the wind howled, rattling windows and shaking the power lines like they were made of nothing but paper. And then, just like that, the lights went out. The whole town was swallowed up in darkness, as if the storm had decided that Liberty Hill wasn't worth the trouble of seeing. People fumbled for flashlights and candles, their voices rising in the hush of the power outage. Their lives, as inconvenient as the blackout was, carried on with a predictable rhythm. There were no phones, no lights, no internet. Just the low murmur of people talking, trying to make the best of it, knowing the power would come back eventually. But as the hours passed, something strange happened. There was one house. One that still had light. The house sat at the very edge of town, old and ramshackle, surrounded by overgrown weeds and the kind of grass that only grew thick and untended. It had a tired look to it, like a woman who had lived through too many storms in too many years, but it was still standing. Its windows glowed with a soft, almost unnatural light, a warm amber that spilled out onto the front porch, casting strange, long shadows across the lawn. The rest of the town was dark, shrouded in blackness, but this one house burned like a beacon in the distance. No one was sure why, or how. The storm had knocked out every other house's power, but this house had managed to hold on to its electricity. The people of Liberty Hill weren't used to anything strange happening in their little town, but when they saw that light, they couldn't ignore it. Curiosity pulled them in, a force they didn't quite understand, but couldn't resist. It was just past midnight when the first of them, Old Man Buster Jenkins, decided to find out what was going on. He was the kind of man who had seen a lot of things in his time, but nothing quite like this. "Guess I'll take a look," he muttered, grabbing his flashlight and making his way through the dark streets. He wasn't afraid of the dark, or at least he didn't want anyone to think he was. He lived alone, after all, and that house at the edge of town, it had always been a little odd. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. The windows always shut tight, the front door always locked. The whole town had heard rumors over the years, rumors of strange noises at night, of things that moved when they shouldn't have. But tonight, something felt different. The closer Buster got, the more the air around him seemed to change. The wind, which had been howling earlier, had quieted down. Now it was still, and the only sound was the steady drip of rainwater from the eaves of nearby homes. When he reached the front gate, he hesitated. The light spilling from the house was strangely warm, almost inviting, but there was something unsettling about it. Something off. He shook his head. There was no reason to be afraid. He pushed the gate open, the hinges squealing in protest, and walked up the front steps. The porch was creaky, as if the house itself was groaning under the weight of time. He knocked 3 times, but the sound barely registered in the heavy silence. He stood there for a moment, listening for any movement inside, but nothing came. He knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. Buster's curiosity outweighed his caution, and he tried the door handle. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. It creaked open with a soft, protesting groan, and he stepped inside. The air inside was thick, stagnant, and oddly cold despite the warmth from the light. The house was small, with old wooden floors that creaked underfoot. The light came from an overhead chandelier casting soft shadows on the walls. Buster squinted, scanning the room, his eyes finally falling on something that made his blood run cold. There, sitting in the middle of the room, was a girl. She was young, maybe in her late teens, early 20s, and she was wearing a white dress that looked like it had been pulled straight from the past, from a time long gone. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead as if waiting for something. Her hair was long and black, cascading down her back like a waterfall, but it was the way she sat, unmoving, that unnerved him the most. She hadn't aged a single day. It wasn't just that she was still young. She looked exactly as she had in 1942 when the town had last seen her. Her face was perfect, unlined by time, untouched by age or illness. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. Buster took a step forward, his breath shallow. "Who are you?" he whispered, but the girl didn't answer. She just sat there, staring into space, her hands resting on her lap, unmoving. That's when he saw it, the clock on the wall behind her. It had stopped. The second hand was frozen in place, and Buster's eyes widened as he realized the time. It was 1979. The clock hadn't moved in 40 years. The girl finally moved, turning her head slowly toward him. Her mouth opened, but the words that came out were not her own. They were deep, like they came from somewhere far away, someplace beyond the grave. "You should leave," she said. "Time has forgotten me." Buster stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to make sense of what he was seeing, but it didn't matter. The house wasn't just holding on to power, it was holding on to something else, something far darker. Buster ran out of the house, his feet stumbling over the porch steps, his mind reeling with questions he couldn't answer. When he reached the street, he turned back, but the house was already dark. The lights were gone, and so was the girl. The next morning, when the storm passed and the power came back on in Liberty Hill, no one talked about the house. No one spoke of the girl in the white dress, the one who hadn't aged in 40 years. They didn't even remember her. But Buster Jenkins did. He would never forget, because some things in Liberty Hill didn't just disappear. They stayed. Forever. It sat at the edge of Abilene, just outside of town, like a dark thing waiting to be forgotten. The house had been there for as long as anyone could remember, built during a time when the city had yet to sprawl, when the land was wide and empty and full of ghosts that didn't bother with the living. But the house itself, that old stone structure with its sagging porch and rotting windows, had always felt different. It felt wrong. The neighbors said it was haunted. That was the common assumption, the easy explanation. But it wasn't a ghost that walked its creaking floors. It wasn't the kind of haunting you read about in books or see in movies. No, this house wasn't filled with spirits. It was filled with something far worse. It was alive. It started slowly. Just small things. At first, a window that was left open even though no one had opened it. The front door that always seemed to be ajar, as though waiting for someone to come inside. the way the trees in the yard would sway and rustle without a breath of wind. People chalked it up to the age of the house. After all, old houses creak and groan, and the wood settles in strange ways. But then came the whispers. It was Emily Carter who first noticed them. She had just moved into the house with her husband Mark, looking for a quiet place to settle after their hectic life in the city. They thought they had found a gem, cheap, isolated, with a sprawling piece of land that promised peace and privacy. A perfect place to start over. But from the very first night, Emily felt something wasn't quite right. At first, it was the quiet. A heavy, oppressive silence that sat over the house like a blanket. Mark had fallen asleep in their bedroom, and Emily was lying awake, staring up at the ceiling when she heard it. A low scraping sound like fingernails against wood. It was faint at first, almost as if she imagined it, but as the minutes passed, it grew louder, more distinct. She rolled over and saw nothing. No one. But the sound was still there. Her heart began to pound. But she told herself it was just the house settling. Old houses did that. But it didn't stop. It continued, scratching, tapping, clawing at the walls like something inside was desperate to get out. Emily pulled the covers up to her chin, her fingers trembling as she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out. It wasn't until the next morning that she told Mark. He chuckled, dismissing it as a raccoon or something in the walls. "Just an old house, Em," he said, ruffling her hair. "We'll get used to it." But as the days passed, things began to get worse. The house seemed to be watching them. The kitchen would get cold even when the heat was on. The lights would flicker, and the whispers. They were no longer confined to the night. Sometimes, in the middle of the day, Emily would hear them, soft and indecipherable, coming from somewhere deep inside the house. At first, she thought it was just the wind or the pipes, but soon she knew better. She was starting to feel it. The house wasn't just creaking or settling. It was moving, like it was alive, breathing, watching her every step. One afternoon, Emily went into the basement to retrieve some old boxes Mark had stored there. The air in the basement was thick, stagnant, like the house itself had forgotten to exhale for years. She went down the creaky steps, her shoes tapping against the concrete floor. And as she moved deeper into the shadows, she saw it. At first, it was just a shadow shifting in the far corner. Then it became more distinct, a figure, a man, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through her. He was standing in the corner, his back to her, motionless. "Mark?" Emily called, but the man didn't respond. He didn't even move. She took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mark, is that you?" she said again, but this time, her voice was barely a whisper. The figure turned slowly, too slowly. His face was pale, stretched thin like someone who hadn't eaten in days. His eyes were black, empty pits, and when he opened his mouth to speak, Emily couldn't hear words. Just a rasping sound, like something was trying to speak but had forgotten how. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped back, her legs buckling, beneath her. And then, in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. Gone. She ran upstairs, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she'd seen. When she reached the top, she looked back, half expecting to see the figure following her, but the basement door was closed. There was nothing there. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm her racing heart. Mark was fast asleep beside her, unaware of the terror that had taken root in his wife's chest. Then, she heard it again. The scraping sound. It came from the walls, then from the floorboards. From the very foundation of the house itself, it grew louder, until it was a relentless, maddening scratching that filled every corner of the house. And then from somewhere deep within the bowels of the house, she heard it, a voice. "Come to me," it whispered. "Come to me, Emily." She sat bolt upright in bed, gasping for breath. Mark shifted beside her, but he didn't wake up. He never woke up, because the house didn't want Mark. It wanted her, and it would never stop until it had her. For days, Emily tried to ignore it, but the house didn't let her. It was like it was pulling at her soul, drawing her in, feeding off her fear. And no matter where she went in the house, no matter how far she ran, the walls would whisper, the floors would creak, and the windows would rattle. It wanted her. In the middle of one particularly stormy night, Emily couldn't take it anymore. She fled the house, her feet pounding on the dirt driveway as rain soaked her clothes. She didn't look back. Mark woke up to find her gone. He searched the town, the streets, the woods, but Emily was nowhere to be found. The police found her. A week later, her body curled up in the yard of the house, her eyes wide open. She had died, they said, from exhaustion and exposure. But Mark knew better. The house didn't just kill her, it took her. The house that hated was alive, and it wasn't done yet. When Mark returned to the house to pack his things, he found that the light in the kitchen was on. The whispers had stopped. But as he walked through the front door, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the hallway, standing at the top of the stairs, was Emily. She was smiling, but her eyes were hollow, empty. The skin on her face was stretched tight like something had tried to rip her apart and put her back together. The house had taken her, and now it had become her. It wanted him now, and it wouldn't stop until it was him.